This is Jacob's Algebra, Chapter 13, Lesson 7 on the quadratic formula. This is part 3 of the video for this lesson. So we've worked through problems 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now let's look at problem number 8. What problem number 8 says is solve the following quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. Leave answers in radical form, but simplify as much as possible. So let's look at part B. Part B says 4x squared plus 9x plus 2 equals 0. Now, to use the quadratic formula, your equation must be in standard form. This equation is in standard form, so we can start. Make sure you always write down what your A, B, and C are. Our A is equal to 4 because 4 is in front of the x squared. Our B is equal to 9 because 9 is in front of the x. And our C is equal to 2 because 2 is our constant. So now we write out the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to plug in our values for a, b, and c now. Negative b. Well, b is 9, so negative b must be negative 9. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. B is 9, so b squared is going to be 81. Minus 4 times a times c. Well, 4 times 4 is 16, times 2 is 32, and we're going to subtract that, so minus 32. All over 2a, our a is 4, so 2a is going to be 8. So then we need to solve what is inside of our square root. 81 minus 32 is 49, all over 8. But 49 is a square number. The square root of 49 is 7, so this means x equals negative 9 plus or minus 7 over 8. So we can go ahead and break this up into our two values. We have negative 9 plus 7, which is a negative 2 over 8. And we have a negative 9 minus 7, which is a negative 16 over 8. So now we need to simplify these two values. And our x is equal to negative 1/4 and negative 2. So negative 1/4 and negative 2 are our two answers for number 8, part B. Now let's look at part D. Number 8D. The problem is 8x squared minus 5 equals 0. Whoops. Equals 0. Now this is already in standard form, so we can go ahead and write down our A, B, and C values. A is the number in front of our x squared. That's an 8. B is the number in front of our x. Notice there isn't an x. That means our b must be 0. And then c is our constant. That is a negative 5. Make sure you grab the sign in front of the number, not just the number. Okay, so now we write out our quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is over 2a. So we're going to plug in our values. X equals negative b. Well, our b is 0, so negative b is just going to be 0. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, our b is 0, so when we square it, we still have 0. Minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 8 is 32, and then 32 times a negative 5 is a negative 32. Is a negative 160. And negative 160, when we subtract it, minus a negative 160 is the same as adding 160. And then this is all over 2a. Since our a is 8, 2a is going to be 16. So we can write this as plus or minus the square root of 160 over 16. Now, 160 does have a square factor. We can write 160 as 16 times 10. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16 times 10, and that's all over 16. 16 can be pulled out of the square root. We get plus or minus 4 times the square root of 10 over 16. Now we can divide the top and the bottom by 4, and we end up with plus or minus square root 10 over 4. So plus or minus square root 10 over 4 is our answer for number 8, part D. Now let's take a look at one more part from number 8. Let's look at number 8f. The equation is x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 0. This is in standard form, so we can go ahead and write down our a, b, and c values. A equals 1, b equals 10, c equals 25. Now we're going to plug these into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we plug in our values. X equals negative b. Our b is 10, so negative b is negative 10. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, 10 squared is 100. Minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 1 is 4, times 25 is 100. So we have 100 minus 100. All over 2a, our a is 1, so 2a is 2. And what we end up with is negative 10 plus or minus 0 over 2. Well, this is just negative 10 over 2, so our x is negative 5. So that was number 8, part F. Remember, number 8 is just like number 15 that I assigned for homework. This problem already has everything in standard form. You just have to write down your values for A, B, and C, and then solve the equation. Okay, so next let's look at number 9. Number 9 says, write each of the following quadratic equations in standard form and solve by using the quadratic formula. Simplify your solution as much as you can. So let's look at number 9, part B. We have 4 times x squared minus 2 is equal to x. So we need to multiply this out. 4 times x squared is 4x squared. 4 times a negative 2 is a negative 8. And that equals x. To put this in standard form, I need to subtract x from both sides. So we will have 4x squared minus x minus 8 equals 0. Now we can write down our a, b, and c values. A is 4. B is negative 1. Remember, you have to grab that negative. C is negative 8. You have to grab that negative. You can't just leave it there. Now we use our quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You will need to memorize this. Okay, so now we're going to plug in our values. Negative b. Well, our b is negative 1, so the negative of b is a positive 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 1, when we square it, is a positive 1. Minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 4 is 8. Times a negative 8 is going to give us 100 and... what is that going to give us? 8 times 4 is 32. Let's punch that in a calculator. 4 times 4 times 8. That's going to give us negative 128, because we had 4 times negative 8. That will give us negative 128, and we're subtracting that. And that's all over 2a. Our a is 4, so 2a is 8. So what we have here is 1 plus or minus the square root of 129, because 1 minus a negative 128 is 129. And then that's all over 8. And 129 has no square factors, so we can just leave that as 120, square root of 129. So that's number 9, part B. Let's move on and look at number 9, part D. So part D says x minus 7 times x plus 3 equals negative 5. So we need to multiply this out. If you are not absolutely rock solid on multiplying things out in this form, please use a grid. X times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. Negative 7 times x is negative 7x. Negative 7 times 3 is negative 21. That equals negative 5. So I'm going to go ahead and combine these two terms. X squared minus 4x, because 3x minus 7x is negative 4x. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Negative 21 plus 5 is going to be a negative 21 plus 5 is going to be a negative 16, and that equals 0. And now we need to write down our A, B, and C. Our A is 1. Our B is -4. Our C is -16. So we write down our quadratic formula, -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. Okay, if our b is -4, then our -b has to be a +4, plus or minus the square root of b squared. -4 when we square it is a +16, minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 1 times -16 is -64. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. This is all over 2a. Since our a is 1, 2a is 2. And what we have here is x equals 4 plus or minus the square root. 16 plus 64 is 80. All over 2. 80 has a square factor. We can write 80 as 16 times 5. So this is 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 times 5, all over 2. That becomes 4 plus or minus 4 root 5 over 2. And now we can divide everything by 2 to get x equals 2 plus or minus 2 root 5. And that's our answer for number 9, part D, which is just like number 16 that I assigned as homework. Now, one last one that we will work on is number 10. Number 10 is just like number 17 that's assigned as homework. Number 10 says use the quadratic formula to solve the equation for x in terms of the other variables. So if we have dx squared minus x minus e equals 0. So x is our only variable. We need to write down our values for a, b, and c. A is the number in front of x squared, so that's a d. B is the number in front of x, so that's a -1. C is our constant, so that's a -e. So now we write down our formula, x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. Okay, so our x will equal -b. Since our b is -1, -b must be a +1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. -1 when we square it is a +1. Minus 4 times a times c. 4 times d times -e is a -4de. 1 minus 4de, 1 minus a -4de is the same as 1 plus 4de. And this is all over 2a. Our a is d, so that's all over 2d. And that's as far as we can go with number 10, part B. Okay, let's look at number 10, part D. Number 10, part D says fx squared plus gx equals 0. This is in standard form, so our a is f, our b is g, and our c is 0 because we have no constant here. So our x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. So let's plug in our values. -b, our b is g, so -b is going to be -g, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Since our b is g, when we square it, we get g squared, minus 4 times a times c. 4 times f times 0 is 0. All over 2a, our a is f, so that's going to be 2f. So what we end up with here is x is equal to -g plus or minus the square root of g squared is just g, and then this is over 2f. So what we get here is -g plus g is 0 over 2f, and -g minus g is -2g over 2f. So what that simplifies to is 0 over 2f is 0, -2g over 2f is -g over f. And those are our two answers for number 10, part D, which is just like number 17 that I assigned for homework.